She only wanted to save her grandmother's bookstore. He only wanted to silence his mother for one weekend. The plan was simple: a cold agreement with clear clauses, a set fee, and a rehearsed script. It was all pretend. Just one weekend. No feelings. No risk. But no one predicted what would come next. They swore not to get involved. But between the well-rehearsed lies, truths began to rise, truths no one could hide anymore. And when everything came out, right in front of everyone, what remained wasn't shame. It was love. Now they're apart, hurt, quiet. But what if true love doesn't depend on words, but on actions? Take a deep breath and hit play, because this story starts as an act, but the ending might surprise you more than you think. And of course, if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, leave a like, and drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. It helps us keep sharing stories that move and transform. Nathan Carter commanded respect before he even spoke a word. He was the kind of man who owned a room effortlessly, not because he flaunted wealth, but because of the sharp silence that always seemed to follow him. At 39, he was the CEO of Carter Dynamics, one of the country's top tech companies, and he lived alone in the penthouse of Hudson Tower, a sleek building of glass and steel in the heart of Manhattan. His apartment, dressed in shades of grey, black and white, reflected not just good taste, but an almost obsessive need for control. The Italian leather armchair, the Persian rug without a single thread out of place, the bookshelf arranged by colour and size, everything screamed perfection, or at least the illusion of it. It was as if each detail had been designed to keep chaos firmly outside. Even the artwork on the walls, all by minimalist artists, seemed to hold too much emotion inside their sober frames. That morning, the city below was buzzing. From up high, Nathan watched the yellow cabs zigzagging through the avenues like hurried ants. The sky was overcast, but that didn't distract him. His thoughts were elsewhere, on a golden invitation resting on the marble countertop in the kitchen. Jake, his younger brother, was getting married, and with that came trouble. It wasn't the wedding itself that bothered Nathan. It was the fact that his mother had never been more determined to see him settled as well. Margaret Carter had always been a woman of strong opinions, and now in her later years she firmly believed that a man was only truly complete with a wife by his side. Her calls had become more frequent in the last few months, always starting off sweet and ending in subtle pressure. "You're going alone again, Nathan," she had said on their last call. "People will start thinking there's something wrong with you, and maybe there was, even if no one knew exactly what it was." Nathan stepped away from the balcony and walked toward the coffee machine. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air with something almost comforting, but even that didn't ease the tightness growing in his chest. He was annoyed at himself for even considering such a ridiculous idea. A fake girlfriend. That had been the suggestion from Karen, his loyal and sharp assistant, who always knew what to say when he started shutting the world out. "If you bring someone who seems at least halfway serious, your mum will back off. And you'll avoid Vanessa." Vanessa. Just hearing the name made his jaw clench. His ex, manipulative and charming, would be at the wedding. And Margaret, who still held on to hopes of seeing them together again, had insisted on putting her on the guest list. As if dealing with family pressure wasn't enough, he'd now have to face suggestive glances and mind games from someone who knew him far too well. The plan was simple. Hire an escort? Never. That would be way too tacky. But hiring someone poised, presentable, with a convincing backstory, someone who could pretend to be his fiancée just for the weekend and then vanish from his life. That might work. Karen already had someone in mind. A woman off the radar, discreet, but with a natural charm, an independent illustrator named Emily Dawson, single, living in Brooklyn, and in desperate need of money. $15,000 to be exact. Nathan wasn't easy to impress, but something about Karen's description had caught his attention. She had said, "She's light but grounded, sweet but won't bend easily. And the best part? She doesn't care about your money. Isn't that what you want?" He hadn't answered at the time, but now, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Adjusting the cuff of his shirt with surgical precision, Nathan knew the decision had already been made. He was going to do it. Not for his mother, not even because of Vanessa, but because for the first time in a long while, part of him wanted to know what it would feel like to pretend to love someone, pretend to be normal, pretend his life wasn't a script. He controlled to the last detail. Maybe deep down he was just tired of being the man who always had the answers, always did everything right, but felt absolutely nothing. The chime from his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. Karen had sent confirmation. Emily Dawson would meet him that evening at his penthouse to go over the details of the arrangement. She knew the amount, the duration, the role. But she didn't know that by stepping through that door, she'd be entering a world where emotions were locked away in invisible vaults, and where any crack in the control could become far too dangerous for both of them. Nathan picked up the golden invitation and shut it away in the drawer with a soft, final click. Then he ran a hand through his dark hair, took a deep breath and got ready. After all, if he was going to act, he'd do it flawlessly. What he didn't know was that life was about to improvise, and for the first time, he wouldn't be the one holding the script. Emily Dawson loved the smell of old books. There was something about the mix of aged paper, faded ink and wood that made her heart slow down, even when everything around her felt like it was about to fall apart. Maple and Ink, the bookstore she'd inherited from her grandmother, was her refuge, and at the same time her battlefield. Tucked away on a charming Brooklyn street between indie cafes and pop-up art galleries, the little shop with the light blue storefront was a living piece of memory. The windows had crooked frames, the shelves groaned under the weight of stories, and in the back, one shelf held her own delicate drawings, painted between sips of coffee. There, between forgotten novels and fairy tales, Emily clung to something few people still seem to value: the beauty of a human touch, of a page turned gently, of time moving slower. But a love for books didn't pay the rent. And that grey Tuesday morning, when she opened the brown envelope that had been slipped under the door, she knew she was staring at a small business owner's worst nightmare. A notice of a massive rent increase. 40%, non-negotiable. 30 days to comply. She read the letter once, then again, a third time, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But no, it was real. She sank into the worn armchair beside the counter, pulled her knees to her chest and let her head drop onto her folded arms. For a moment the world spun faster than usual. That bookstore was everything she had, her grandmother's memory, who used to read to her by candlelight when the power went out, still lingered in the corners. Emily knew exactly where the ink stain was from when she was 7, and she could still recall the scent of cookies that filled the air every time her grandma opened the old tin behind the counter. Losing that place to real estate greed wasn't just a professional blow. It felt personal, deeply emotional. That's when the phone rang. Hello? Hi, is this Emily Dawson? This is Karen Miller. I work with Mr. Nathan Carter at Carter Dynamics. Emily took a second to answer. The name sounded distant, like something pulled from a headline about eccentric billionaires. Yes, that's me. How can I help you? Karen didn't waste time, like someone who already knew the weight of what she was about to say. I have a somewhat unusual proposal, but it pays very well. I just ask that you hear me out before making a decision. With each word, Emily frowned a little more. A powerful man, CEO of a tech company, needed someone to pretend to be his fiancée for a weekend at a luxury resort. The reason? A family wedding involving a controlling mother and an ex-girlfriend with high heels and a venomous smile. The offer was clear. 3 days. No physical contact required. Just convincing appearances and behavior. Total discretion. And $15,000 paid up front before departure. And why me? She asked, part skeptical, part intrigued. Because you don't seem like someone looking for attention, because you're off the radar, because you have presence without being flashy, and honestly, because you need this. Emily couldn't tell if she felt insulted or grateful, maybe a bit of both. Deep down, the woman was right. She did need it. That money could keep the bookstore alive for at least 6 more months, enough time to plan workshops, events, maybe even launch her online shop for illustrated books. She ended the call without giving an answer. The rest of the afternoon, she paced around the empty store as if the books might help her decide. That night, she pulled out a box of old drawings from the closet. One of them showed a little girl in a yellow dress, floating above a book-made city, holding onto a red balloon. It had been the cover for a project that never got off the ground. "What would you do, Grandma?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Silence. The next morning she called back, "I'm in." Karen didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Great, tonight at 8. Hudson Tower Penthouse. Mr. Carter wants to meet you before moving forward with the plan." Emily hung up and stared at her reflection in the shop window, hair tied back in a messy bun, a worn-out book-themed t-shirt, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. This wasn't some romantic movie fantasy. It was business. A deal between two completely different worlds, hers made of illustrations and nostalgia, and his of steel, numbers, and silence. Still, something inside her whispered that this story, as absurd as it sounded, was far from ending where it began, and maybe, just maybe, the script was about to get its first brushstrokes of improvisation. Nathan had never been a fan of lateness. Every minute in his schedule had a calculated value, so when the clock hit exactly 8:02 p.m., his fingers were already tapping against the side of the couch with quiet impatience. The living room of his penthouse, usually a sanctuary of silence and predictability, now felt charged with a subtle tension. He wore a crisp navy blue shirt, sleeves rolled up to the forearm, and his hair was combed with near-military precision. But inside, something stirred, a restlessness he couldn't quite name. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carter, Miss Dawson is here." He hesitated, just for a second, then replied, voice steady, "Send her up." As he walked toward the door, he instinctively adjusted his collar. The private elevator glided silently, and the soft sound of feminine footsteps echoed until the door finally opened. Emily stood there. Dark jeans, a wine-colored knit sweater that complemented her fair skin, and a worn-out shoulder bag. Her hair was loose, naturally wavy and slightly wild, like it refused to be tamed. She glanced around the space with a curious, unfiltered gaze. "Wow. Feels like I just walked into an Architectural Digest catalog," she said, before he could even greet her. Nathan raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the entrance he was expecting. "You're 2 minutes late," Emily smiled. "And you counted the minutes. That's very CEO of you." He wanted to reply, but didn't. Instead, he stepped aside to let her in. The soft tap of her low heels against the wooden floor echoed through the room. "Can I get you something? Water, wine, contract?" Emily laughed, casually perching herself on the arm of an armchair. "How about starting with a, 'Hi, how was your day?' Or, 'Is that not in the script?'" Nathan crossed his arms, studying her like an unpredictable variable in a perfectly coded system. The more he tried to read her, the more intrigued he became. "Fair enough. Hi, Emily, how was your day?" Terrifying, odd, confusing, and now a bit surreal. Surreal? She glanced around once more, then fixed her gaze on him with rare honesty. "Because I'm in a billionaire's penthouse about to pretend to be his fiancée, and all because my bookstore is about to go under." Nathan was caught off guard by her frankness. He'd expected hesitation, maybe embarrassment, but there was a disarming lightness about her, and it threw him off. "And yet you said yes." "Of course. I need the money. You need the act. We're being adults. Pragmatic." She walked over to his bookshelf, running her fingers along the neatly aligned technical titles. "Wow, do you actually read all of these?" "I like to keep things organized." "That explains why your apartment feels like a modern museum." With OCD. Nathan didn't laugh, but something in his expression softened. "Can we go over what you need to know for the weekend?" "Sure, but before we do, I have a suggestion." "An extra clause? A backstory?" Nathan frowned slightly. "Backstory?" Emily nodded, pulling a small red notebook from her bag. It was already scribbled with notes, like she'd come prepared. "If we're going to pretend we're engaged, we need a solid story. How we met, first kiss, first I love you, the usual. You've already thought this through. Of course, illustrators know how to build narratives, but She glanced at him with a sly smile. I figured it'd be more fun if we came up with it together. Nathan sat across from her, intrigued despite himself. I'm listening. How about a coffee shop in Brooklyn? You walk in all serious, in a suit, on a call about mergers and stocks. I'm in line holding a latte. You bump into me. Coffee spills on your shirt. Chaos. And then our eyes meet. She placed a hand on her chest, adding drama to the moment. That's where it all began, we'd say at the rehearsal dinner. Nathan stared at her for a beat. Then, against all odds, he smiled. That's ridiculous. Exactly, that's why it's perfect. She jotted it down. First meeting, coffee shop, spilled coffee, corporate drama, intense eye contact. Are you always like this? He asked. A bit more relaxed. Like what? Uncontrollable. Emily raised an eyebrow. Are you always like this? So predictable. For a second, silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. Full of invisible layers, like they were trying to decode each other without speaking. Emily broke the moment, closing her notebook. Well, I think we've got a script. Now we just need rehearsal. Is that necessary? She stood and walked toward him with a light, confident step. Only if you want to sound convincing when you say you love me. Nathan swallowed hard, not because of what she said, but how she said it. As if it were the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't flirting. She was playing with words, with his mind, and that was new, annoying, fascinating. See you tomorrow at 9. I'll send a car. Perfect, she said, walking to the door. And try to look a little less CEO. It'll help the act. When the door closed behind her, Nathan stood still for a few seconds, in silence. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know exactly what to think. And strangely, he didn't mind. The private jet landed smoothly on the secluded airstrip near Lake Tahoe, surrounded by mountains that looked like they'd been sculpted out of silence. Inside, Emily stared out the window, wide-eyed, as if she were crossing the gates of a kingdom, where every tree had been planted with intention. This was another world, and she was just a temporary visitor. Nathan, sitting beside her, kept his usual composed posture. But even he seemed more tense. His tie was tighter than usual, his jaw subtly clenched. This wasn't just a weekend of pretending. This was his mother's domain. And his ex's. Ready? He asked as the driver opened the door. Emily gave a wry smile. Nope, but let's pretend I am. That's what we're here for, right? Outside, the resort looked like a living painting. Rustic stone buildings, rich wooden details, tall pine trees, and the silvery shimmer of the lake in the distance. Guests strolled along flower-lined paths with champagne flutes in hand, while soft orchestral music floated in the air. It was all too beautiful, too rich. Stay close. My mother's going to want to analyze you from head to toe, Nathan warned, straightening his posture. Emily linked her arm with his, just like they'd agreed, and whispered, Great, let the games begin. The impact was immediate. Jake Carter, Nathan's younger brother, came rushing toward them with a bright, welcoming smile. His shirt collar was open, and his eyes carried a totally different kind of energy. Light, cheerful, almost boyish. So this is the famous Emily, he said, pulling her into a casual hug. If my brother doesn't treat you right, you can always come with me. Emily laughed, already charmed by the contrast between the two brothers. If I'd known the charm ran in the family, I might have negotiated with you instead. Rachel Adams, Jake's fiancée, appeared right behind him. Brunette, elegant and warm, she greeted Emily with a cheek kiss and a conspiratorial smile. I already love you. Welcome to our little family circus. But the warmth didn't last long. As they entered the main lobby, the emotional temperature dropped a few degrees. Margaret Carter, the matriarch, stood by the lit fireplace, holding a glass of white wine, and the sharpest gaze Emily had ever received. So this is Emily, she said with a pause long enough to weigh down the name. Emily reached out politely. Mrs. Carter, it's a pleasure. We'll see if it stays that way, the woman replied, not smiling, her eyes scanning Emily's outfit like a jeweler checking for a fake gem. Nathan jumped in quickly. Mom, let's not start. I'm just being polite, dear. You should try it sometime, Margaret shot back before turning and walking away with practiced grace. Emily took a deep breath. She wasn't new to judgmental glances, but this was practically Cold War theater. And then she appeared. Vanessa Blake. Blonde, flawless, wrapped in a designer dress that clung to every curve like it had been tailored to provoke envy. She walked, like someone who knew she was being watched and loved it. "Nathan," she purred. "What a surprise. You brought company." Nathan nodded curtly. "Vanessa." She turned to Emily with a poisoned smile. "And you must be the invisible fiancé. No one's ever heard of Emily, right?" "That's right," Emily replied, calm and firm. "And you must be the ex who still doesn't understand the concept of the past." The silence that followed was priceless. Even Nathan raised an eyebrow. Vanessa let out a forced laugh and walked away with a theatrical wave. Emily felt her heart pounding but kept her face composed. "That was bold," Nathan murmured as they headed to the lounge. "That was self-preservation. That woman smells like expensive perfume and blood." The afternoon continued with the official welcome on the resort's terrace. Ambient music, waiters carrying trays of sparkling wine, couples dancing under lights strung between the trees. Nathan and Emily blended in, exchanging smiles and calculated touches, while she effortlessly improvised charming little stories about how they met, so convincingly that even Margaret seemed to begin questioning her own suspicions. Later, that night, during a quieter moment, Nathan led Emily down to the edge of the lake. "You're handling all of this really well," he said, looking out at the reflection of the lights on the water. 20 years of dealing with school mums at children's book fairs prepared me for this," she replied, slipping off her shoes and sitting at the edge of the wooden dock, her toes just above the cold water. Nathan hesitated, then sat beside her, for the first time without the armor. "You know, it's been a long time since I've shared a comfortable silence with someone." Emily turned to him. "And it's been a long time since I felt safe surrounded by this much luxury." His eyes lingered on her a moment longer than what would be considered casual. The breeze picked up, lifting a few strands of her hair. He almost reached out to brush them aside, but stopped at the last second. Emily noticed, and though she said nothing, she smiled. The first day at the resort was an endless parade of social events. Cocktails, dinners, rehearsals, family lunches and casual receptions with guests who looked like they'd stepped out of an heirs and CEOs catalogue. Nathan and Emily were present, at them all side by side, smiling as if it were second nature. But what had started as an act was beginning to shift into something else. Nathan noticed things he wouldn't have before. How Emily subtly squeezed his hand whenever Vanessa approached, with that venomous stare. How she genuinely laughed at Rachel's embarrassing stories about Jake. How she could blend humor and grace, even when commenting on dessert. She was light, and he, who had always been carved out of stone, was beginning to soften at the edges. The first official evening after dinner, there was a couple's dance. When Nathan's name was called to open the floor with his fiancée, he hesitated, but Emily was already standing with a confident smile and her hand extended. "Come. On, Mr. Carter. Time to show you can fake emotions with your feet, too." The band played a soft version of La Vie en Rose, and as their steps fell into sync, Nathan realized how naturally her body fit against his. It wasn't forced seduction. It was harmony. "Do you always dance like this?" he murmured, keeping his eyes on hers. "Only when I'm pretending to be in love," she replied with a playful glint in her eyes. But there was something more, an edge to her smile, a warmth that wasn't faked. The guests watched them, enchanted. Vanessa, across. The room bit her lip, clearly losing control of the situation. Margaret, wineglass in hand, stared at them intently, not with approval, but with curiosity, as if for the first time she didn't know what she was seeing. That night, when they returned to their shared suite, an appearance requirement, Nathan headed straight for the pull-out sofa in the sitting room, leaving the main bedroom to Emily. "You really don't have to sleep on the couch," she said, leaning against the doorway in a light robe, her hair still damp from the shower. "Yes, I do. The line between what's real and what's not is already blurry enough." Emily didn't push, but she didn't close the door right away either. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She walked into the room and sat cross-legged in the armchair, pulling a blanket over her lap. My dad used to call me his restless wind. He said I never stopped daydreaming, that I made up stories about everything, even the neighbor's dog. Nathan smiled, a little surprised by the sweetness of the memory. That sounds more like a compliment than a complaint. It was. But after he died, people started telling me I needed to face reality. Stop dreaming. My relationships, my projects, they were always seen as illusions. She paused, eyes fixed on a distant spot. I think that's why I said yes to this arrangement. I wanted to prove to myself I could still fly, even if it was with borrowed wings. Nathan stayed silent. It touched him more than he wanted to admit. And you? She asked, turning her gaze back to him. Why do you still care so much about what your mother thinks? Nathan took a slow breath. Because, for a long time, pleasing her was the only way I felt seen. My father was the genius, the founder. Jake, the charismatic one. And I was the one who did everything right. The one who didn't cause trouble. Who kept up appearances. Emily stood up and walked over to him. But keeping up appearances, that's a kind of prison too, isn't it? He looked into her eyes for a long moment. It is. And in that moment she touched his hand. It wasn't romantic. It was deeper than that. A quiet touch that said, I see you. The following days were more of the same. Dinners laced with Margaret's subtle questions, verbal fencing matches with Vanessa, and little escapes that Emily and Nathan carved out just to breathe. They developed signals. A look to warn someone was approaching. A hand squeeze to say I'm losing patience. A whisper in the ear when they needed to laugh at how ridiculous everything was. And between it all, they talked. About architecture and literature. His childhood in boarding schools. Her teenage years filled with sketchbooks. Their fears, their failures. With each new conversation, the line between fake and real blurred even more. On the night before the wedding, there was an outdoor dinner lit by lanterns, strung through the trees, with live music playing softly in the background. Emily wore a deep green dress that made her eyes shine, and Nathan, for the first time, seemed genuinely at ease. As the guests toasted, she leaned in and asked, Have you ever thought that maybe this is all happening for a reason? What kind of reason? The kind we only understand when it's over. Nathan didn't answer, but he looked at her like he'd suddenly forgotten they were surrounded by dozens of people. Later that night, when they returned to the suite, Emily paused at the bedroom door and turned back. Good night, Nathan. Good night, Emily. She hesitated, then opened the door, stepped inside and gently closed it behind her. Nathan stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the space where she'd just been. And that's when he realized. He didn't want this to end. The pre-wedding reception was taking place in a fully glass-walled hall overlooking the lake, which mirrored the last golden hues of the sunset. The setting was flawless, stunning floral arrangements, soft live music in the background, and guests elegantly scattered in small, polished groups. But the air around Emily felt anything but calm. She could feel it. Something was about to happen. Nathan was deep in conversation with his brother and future father-in-law when Emily stepped away for another glass of champagne. She had sensed Vanessa's stare on her all evening, sharp and persistent, but this time the air felt different, too charged, as if Vanessa had been holding something back and was ready to strike, and she did. Right in the middle of the room, just as the band shifted to a livelier tune and the bride was raising her glass for a toast, Vanessa strutted into the center of the hall with deliberate steps. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice honeyed with venom, but I think everyone here deserves to know the truth. The room went dead silent. Emily froze, glass in hand. Vanessa raised her phone. Nathan Carter is not engaged, never was. This woman, she pointed at Emily, was hired. That's right, hired to pretend to be the perfect fiancé. And guess what? I have proof. Nathan, who had already begun to stand, stopped mid-motion. All eyes turned to Emily. Vanessa began reading aloud. Dear Mr. Carter, as agreed, I accept the terms of the proposal. 3-day stay, $15,000 payable upon arrival. In return, I agree to portray your fiancé during the family event. She paused for effect, locking eyes with Emily. With no emotional involvement. Gasps and whispers spread through the room. Margaret Carter, standing near the groom, let her glass fall to the floor with a soft clink. Rachel's eyes widened. Jake went pale. Emily didn't move. She could have run, denied it, pleaded, but she didn't. "It's true," she said, voice steady as she faced the crowd. "I accepted an arrangement. I knew exactly what I was doing." The murmur turned into a buzz, and some guests started to drift away as if the moment might be contagious. Vanessa smiled, triumphant. "See? A professional con artist, and all of you fell for it." Nathan, who had been silent until then, crossed the room with firm strides. He stopped beside Emily, eyes blazing. "Enough, Vanessa. Oh, you're defending her after everything? Because of everything. That's exactly why I'm defending her." He turned to the crowd. "Yes, there was a deal. It started as a farce. A foolish attempt to avoid pressure from my mother, my ex, and society's ridiculous expectations of who I should be. But what happened here, what I experienced with her, was real. More real than any relationship I've ever had." Emily held her breath. Nathan didn't look away from her. "I fell in love with this woman even when I didn't want to, even when I didn't know how, even while fighting it every single day." The silence in the room was absolute. "And if you can't see who she really is, and that's your problem, not hers," Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now it's true love? After 3 days? How convenient," Nathan exhaled. "Truer than the performance you've been putting on for years." The crowd, once ready to condemn, now seemed split. Margaret, arms crossed, watched with a calculating expression. Emily, meanwhile, felt her heartbeat in her throat. She wanted to speak, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Nathan had just exposed himself for her, and it hurt. It hurt because it made everything feel more real. After the explosion, the party lost its rhythm. Some guests tried to pretend. Nothing had happened. Others slipped away. Margaret said nothing. She simply grabbed her purse and left the hall with what remained of her dignity. Vanessa, now ignored, stormed out shortly after, like an actress who'd been cut from her own. Plain Nathan and Emily stayed behind, in silence. "You didn't have to do that," she said at last, eyes still glassy. "Yes, I did," he replied. "I needed to remind myself that, for the first time in a long time, something that started wrong might still end right." She didn't answer, because in that moment she no longer knew what to feel. And maybe that was the biggest sign of all, that everything had changed. The next morning arrived with an eerie silence at the resort. The scandal from the night before still hung in the air like a fine mist, and every staff member seemed to move slower, more cautiously. The guests split into 2 groups, those pretending nothing had happened, and those already halfway through typing out the gossip in their family group chat. Emily had woken up before sunrise. She got dressed without much thought, tied her hair into a loose bun, and went down to the garden, trying to escape everything. Every perfectly manicured flower, every neatly placed stone path. It all felt like a quiet mockery of the chaos inside her. The bookstore, the money, the deal, the exposure, Nathan's public confession. She could still hear his words echoing through her chest like an offbeat drum. "I fell in love with this woman." Emily wanted to believe it. She really did. But she also knew how powerful guilt, shame, and the urge to fix something broken could be. At 9 a.m., Nathan appeared. He came alone, hands in his pockets, his expression hard, as if he'd spent the whole night wrestling with silent demons. He stopped a few steps from her. "You ran off and I needed to think." "And did you?" She crossed her arms. "I thought maybe this whole thing got out of hand, that I should just go back to Brooklyn, that you should get back to your script." Nathan took a deep breath, then pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. "What's this?" "Your share, what we agreed. $15,000. No extras, no pity." Emily took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why does this feel like a goodbye?" "Because it is. If that's what you want it to be." She looked at him. For a long moment that stretched too far. "Do you have any idea what you said yesterday?" "Every word." "Then why are you handing me money like I'm an unwanted memory?" Nathan stepped closer. Because I don't want you to stay out of guilt, or because you feel sorry for me, or because you think you owe me anything." She looked down. "I don't feel sorry for you, Nathan." "Then tell me what you do feel." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. Just then, someone cleared their throat behind them. It was Margaret, wearing sunglasses, flawless lipstick, and her usual proud posture. But there was something different in her eyes, something softer, more curious. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the stone bench next to them. Emily nodded, still a little stunned. Margaret sat down with theatrical slowness and looked at them both. "I'll be direct. I never approved of this charade, but I saw something yesterday I didn't expect." Nathan crossed his arms, already bracing. "We're leaving, Mom. You don't need to." "I saw a man speak from the heart. I saw my son feel, which is rare." She turned to Emily. "And I saw a woman who could have lied, run away, cried, but chose to face it all. That's rare too." Emily felt her cheeks burn, not from shame, but from disbelief. Margaret stood, adjusted her purse strap, and added, "I don't trust easily, but maybe if there's something real here, the two of you still have a chance." Then she walked, away like someone leaving a letter on the table and stepping out before the other can read it. Emily and Nathan stood in silence for several long seconds until he said, "You know you can leave now. With the money, with your dignity. No one would blame you." She looked at the envelope, then slowly folded it in half and slipped it back into the pocket of his coat. "What if I want to stay?" Nathan didn't reply. He just lifted his eyes to hers. And for the first time since it all began, there was no script, no armor, no plan. There was only him and her. And whatever it was they were building right there on the edge of uncertainty, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind filled the silence. "Jake's wedding is in an hour," she said at last. "We should get ready." Emily, she cut him off with a small smile, one full of meaning. "We'll talk later." And she walked away, leaving Nathan standing in the garden, the envelope in his pocket, his heart in his hands. The wedding was beautiful, maybe even too beautiful. Jake and Rachel looked like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale, smiling as if the whole universe was cheering them on. The vows were spoken with tears in their eyes, the applause was heartfelt, and the Lake Tahoe sunset felt like it had been custom-ordered just for that moment. But for Emily, it was bittersweet. Sitting among the guests beside Nathan, she kept her posture, smiled when she should, but inside, every loving word exchanged between the couple felt like a reminder of what she and Nathan didn't have, or still didn't have the courage to face. She left the next morning, no kisses. No declarations, just a silent hug at the resort's entrance and a whispered, "Take care," as a goodbye. Nathan didn't try to stop her, and somehow that hurt the most. Brooklyn looked grayer when she returned. The bookstore was still there, untouched, but heavy with a longing she didn't quite know how to name. Emily cleaned the shelves, opened the windows, reorganized the books, just like always. But everything felt different, as if the world she'd left behind no longer fit in the same spaces. The envelope with the $15,000 was tucked away in a wooden box under the counter. She hadn't used it yet. Something inside her whispered that money came with more than numbers. It came with memories. Nathan returned to his quiet penthouse, to lonely coffee cups, to endless meetings. His routine picked up again, but the echo of his footsteps on the marble had never sounded so loud, nor the silence so heavy. They exchanged a few messages in the days that followed. "Did you get home okay?" "Yes. You?" Back to chaos, just with less charm now. And then, nothing. Messages typed and deleted, calls started and cancelled, before the first ring. A quiet, almost shameful kind of missing each other, Karen, ever observant, noticed. One day she stepped into Nathan's office with a spreadsheet and commented casually, "Emily's bookstore is back in full swing." "I saw on Instagram, kids' reading event. Line out the door." Nathan only nodded, but that night he spent nearly an hour scrolling through the store's profile, staring at the photos she'd posted, children sitting on the floor, picture books, colorful balloons, and her. Always in the background, smiling, a smile too sad to be just joy, The truth was they were both waiting for something the other didn't know how to give. Emily wanted a gesture, a sign that what he said in the garden wasn't just a moment of impulse. Nathan wanted a signal, proof that she still believed in him, beyond the contract, beyond the performance. But pride, that was the role neither of them seemed ready to drop. Until one rainy Tuesday, Emily needed help moving a heavy bookshelf in the back of the store. She thought about calling a friend, then a neighbor. And somehow, without really knowing why, she typed Nathan's number, then deleted it before hitting send. At that exact moment, the phone rang. It was him. "I was thinking about you," Nathan said, like it was a secret. "Can I come over?" She hesitated for a second, then smiled even though he couldn't see it. "Only if you're ready to lift furniture." He showed up an hour later, soaked from the rain, no umbrella, shirt clinging to him, eyes unsure of where to start. "You look less CEO today," she said, handing him a towel, "and you look more at home." Nathan helped move the shelf. Then he sorted boxes, cleaned the floor, even tried to hang a new sign outside the store. All in silence. Until, while stacking a pile of books, he finally spoke. "I don't want us to keep going like this, distant, afraid of what comes next." Emily looked at him, serious. "And what comes next, Nathan?" He stepped closer. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out with you, sir. Do you still see me as part of a contract?" "No. I think you're the only real thing that's ever walked into my life, even if it all started with a lie." Emily looked away for a moment, trying to hold on to logic, but her voice faltered. "I don't know if I can trust something that began like that. Then let me rebuild it, not as a CEO, as a man, as someone who admires you, who respects you, who misses you every single day." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time since this all began, she didn't feel afraid. She felt relief. But instead of answering, she picked up a whiteboard marker and wrote on the board hanging near. The store's entrance, next event, reading with a special guest, and beneath it she added, Nathan Carter, Saturday, 10 a.m. He read it, smiled, and understood her answer without a single word. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze dancing through the trees in Brooklyn. Maple and ink felt different, more alive, more full of promise. Colorful chairs lined the sidewalk, balloons tied to lampposts, and a small banner hung over the entrance. Special reading with Nathan Carter. People passing by slowed down when they saw the name. Some smiled, others looked puzzled. But there, in that little universe of stories and imagination, the CEO of Carter Dynamics was just a guest. Emily arrived early, as always. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a yellow blouse embroidered with tiny flowers. Her hair was tied in a loose bun as she prepared the space the way she had since her days with her grandmother, lining up cushions on the floor, checking the books, setting out cups of juice for the kids. At 9:50 he arrived. Nathan looked different. Simple white t-shirt, dark jeans, a baseball cap barely hiding how nervous he was. He carried a box in his hands and inside, illustrated books. The very ones Emily had once mentioned in a casual conversation days before. "I thought these could add to your collection," he said, offering a shy smile. "I heard stories are meant to be shared." Emily looked at him for longer than she cared to admit. "Did you read them all?" "Some, twice." The event started right on time. Children of all ages sat in a circle as Emily introduced him. Nathan sat beside her, holding a book with a slightly bent cover. When he began to read, his voice was steady yet gentle. Every word felt thoughtfully chosen. He did voices for the characters, paused at the right moments, and watched the kids as if trying to understand every giggle. Emily watched from a distance. It was almost surreal to see that man, once so cold, so guarded, reading a story about a duck who wanted to fly with balloons. But there he was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his face lit with something real. Joy. After the reading, he helped pick up the books, handed out juice, chatted with the parents. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply showed up. When the last guest left, Emily closed the bookstore door and leaned against it for a moment. What was that? Her little flight On my own wings, Nathan replied, walking toward her. You know what this means, right? That may be... I'm starting to understand what it means to love. Your way. She looked away. And what's my way? Simple. Real light. Nathan pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. What's this? An expansion plan. Expansion? For Maple and Ink. Reading workshops in underserved neighborhoods. Launch of an online store with free shipping. Backed by my company's foundation. Monthly events with independent authors. And a fund to support emerging illustrators. Emily read it silently. You want to turn my bookstore into a social project? No. I want to support what you're already doing. Without changing its soul, without buying anything, just adding to it. She let the paper fall onto the counter and looked at him, eyes brimming. Why are you doing all this? Nathan shrugged. Because words aren't enough. Emily stepped closer. And what if I'm still scared? I am too, but what scares me more is letting this go. She touched his face with the gentleness of a child. Do you know how many times I imagined someone walking into this place, not just for me, but for what I've built? And now? Now I know it was never about imagining. It was about waiting for the right person. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the silence between them became so intimate it felt like it was shouting everything they hadn't said. Nathan looked around. You know, I thought I was offering you the world, but you were the one who opened up mine. Emily laughed softly. That was cheesy. Yeah, but true. So you really want to be part of this? The chaos, the dust, the kids yelling and knocking over books? I do. She held out her hand. Then welcome to Maple and Ink, Mr. Carter. Just don't reorganize my books by color. Nathan took her hand, firm. Deal, but I will mess up your emotions, he warned with a grin. And this time, she let him. 3 months later, Maple and Ink had a new kind of energy. It wasn't just because of the freshly stocked books or the packed events. It was something more subtle, like a soft fragrance in the air, the kind of thing you don't see, but feel. The bookstore's walls had new colors. The back room had been turned into a small art studio, where Emily now held drawing workshops for children. The sign out front had a new handmade plaque that read, Here we believe in the power of stories and new beginnings. Nathan wasn't there every day, but when he came by, he was different. He'd bring coffee, book suggestions, and, most importantly, time. Not as the untouchable CEO he used to be months ago, but as someone who had learned how to be present, attentive, invested. He had become part of the place, part of the routine, part of her. Margaret Carter had changed too, still poised, still elegant, but now with a lightness no one thought possible. One morning, she stopped by the bookstore with 2 of her book club friends. She bought 5 copies of a children's book about empathy and left a quiet note on the counter. For the woman who taught my son that love can't be commanded, it has to be built. Camus Emily read the note through teary eyes and tucked it into a keepsake box beside the first illustration she ever sold. Jake and Rachel stayed close, still bringing their loud laughter, well-meaning advice, and some big news. A baby on the way. Emily cried when she found out. And Nathan stayed silent for a long time, with a quiet smile that said it all. Back in Nathan's Manhattan penthouse, order had given way to affection. The black leather armchair was still there, but now shared space with a navy blue throw Emily always left, draped over it. The once pristine white kitchen sometimes had toast crumbs and mismatched mugs, and the perfectly symmetrical closet now had a drawer filled with art supplies, colored pencils, and a red notebook full of ideas for children's stories. They hadn't changed each other. They had learned to live with the imperfections that once seemed unacceptable. One evening, after an event at the bookstore, Emily and Nathan stayed late, organizing the shelves and locking up. The golden light of dusk streamed through the windows, painting the books with soft warmth. Do you think we would have met if it weren't for all of that? She asked, stacking books. No. And I think that's why it had to happen the way it did. A contract? A nudge, Emily laughed. A nudge with clauses. Nathan stepped closer, reaching for a book on a high shelf. I don't think love stories need to start the right way. They just need to keep going the right way. And how do we know we're on the right path? He looked at her. When The fear of losing someone is greater than the fear of staying. She nodded, her heart full, then pointed to the table in the back of the bookstore. Shall we? On the table, 2 mugs of tea waited, an open sketchbook, and a stack of papers with ideas for a new book, their first project together. Nathan sat beside her, resting his arm behind her chair. Can I suggest a title? What? The Day a CEO Learned to Color Outside the Lines, Emily burst out, laughing, cheesy but acceptable. Good, because now you're stuck with me in this story. No clauses? No clauses, just real promises. She turned to face him, and this time the kiss came. Soft, certain, unhurried, as if it had already been written in every moment of the past few months. Outside, the city moved at its usual dizzying pace. But inside that small space, made of paper, ink, and memory, everything was still. And as the sun set over the shelves, Emily knew one thing for sure. Not every story begins with once upon a time, but some still end in love, or better yet, begin again. In the end, this isn't just the story of a CEO who learned how to feel again, nor of an artist who tried once more not to let go of who she was. It's the story of a love that started as a contract, but blossomed the moment the masks came off, of 2 worlds that were never meant to collide. But when they did, they discovered that true love doesn't begin with perfect promises. It begins with the courage to stay when the script falls apart. Now tell me, have you ever experienced a love that started the wrong way, but changed you from within? Would you have the courage to give a second chance, even after the lie? Do you believe that one gesture can speak louder than 1,000 declarations? Comment below and let us know where you're listening from, and which part of this story touched your heart the most. And of course, if this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, leave a like, and share it with someone special. It helps us keep telling stories that move and transform.